Are you scrapping the second leg of HS2 from Birmingham to Manchester?
So no final decision has been made. I know this is something that you guys have been talking about a lot, but there's no decision that's been made. I know the Chancellor said this morning that all economic infrastructure is kept under review, and we need to make sure that we're always looking at taxpayer value for money, and that is the position.
I know that's the line, no final decision's been made, but it's not just us talking about it. We're talking about it because people in your government are telling us that you're going to scrap it. I mean, the line's broken. It's not holding, is it?
Well, look, all I can tell you is that there's no decision that has been made. It is under review, and all of these things are under review all the time. But it's really important that we look at the overall picture, which is that since 2010, we spent £33 billion on infrastructure in the north. When I was in the Treasury, we were working on these programmes which were making sure that you had better transport infrastructure within cities, which is also really important. So that's all been part of our programme of growth over the last 13 years, and I think that's also really important.
I mean, reading between the lines, it doesn't sound like you're preparing the ground for it to be kept. It sounds like you're rolling the pitch for it to be scrapped.
Well, look, that's not a decision for me, that's a decision for other people, but what I can tell you is that no final decision has been made.
Okay. Now, we're in Manchester, we're literally in an old railway hall, and the news is coming out that you are not going to be extending this rail line to Manchester. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
Well, look, I appreciate that you want to give me questions that I can't answer, but the truth is it's not a decision for me, and all I can tell you right now is no decision has been made. But of course, we've been investing in infrastructure across the country, and particularly in the north, for the last 10 years.
Okay, I've got the line, I understand. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, gave a speech today where it felt to me like he was almost signalling the return back to austerity in some ways, hiring freeze in the civil service, squeeze on benefits. At the very same time, Liz Truss is pitching a totally different economic vision, one of growth, one of tax cuts. Who's right?
So I wouldn't say that at all. I reject that there was a return to austerity. What he actually talked about was raising the national living wage. It's going to be now, I think, if not the highest, one of the highest national living wages anywhere in Europe. And actually, if you look at something like benefits, we raised them in line with inflation about 10% this year. And throughout the course of the last few years, when people have struggled, whether it's with furlough or helping them through the energy crisis with £40 billion of support, we have supported vulnerable people at a high cost to the rest of the taxpayers to make sure that we can really support vulnerable people through these difficult times.
I want to ask you about Liz Truss as well. Is she being helpful?
Well, look, I think Conservative Party, one of the things I love about it is that it is always a broad church, and we feel very comfortable in having debates about things. So I haven't followed all of her comments, but I do think it's good that she stands up and talks about her views. I think it's good that everyone in the party feels that they can do that.
I mean, the place was rammed. There was queues snaking around the corridor. There was over 200 people in the room, it felt like. Is the Conservative Party preparing to go back to the future with Liz Truss?
I'm very happy with the current Prime Minister. I think everyone is as well. But look, I think the really important thing is that we have our debates here, we talk about different ideas, and what you're going to see from the Prime Minister is his long-term vision to make sure that we've got plans in the longer term for the future, and I think that's what you'll be seeing from us.
I mean, there's a serious point here, though, because it feels like you're losing control of the narrative a bit. You've got Liz Truss pitching an alternative economic vision, you've got the HS2 announcement effectively leaking out. I mean, what's going on?
Well, look, I think party conferences, as you'll know, because you'll have been to a ton, I've been to a ton, always have...
last year,
they always have moments like this. We're here to have a debate, we're here to talk about fresh ideas, and I think the really important thing is that you'll see from the government, from the Prime Minister, ideas which will be talking about the longer-term security of the country. That's what you saw from me today in terms of the energy sector. I was talking about things like nuclear, pushing forward on things like small modular reactors, which are all the things which are in the best interest for the long term in the country.
Yeah, you've suddenly, with your brief, it feels, being propelled right to the front of the Conservatives' election pitch. A lot of it is about being on the side of drivers. I mean, are you a motorist yourself? What car do you drive?
I am. I have a second-hand Ford Fiesta. I wouldn't say I'm the world's best driver. I'm quite a cautious driver, but I do have a car that I do drive.
And you think that the embracement, I guess, of the kind of driving agenda is not at odds with net zero?
No, not at all. Not at all. This is the thing. I think, lots of people need their cars to get around. Like, I have a semi-rural constituency, and for lots of people, there's no other way to get around. I think it's really important that we support drivers. But if you look at what's happening with net zero, we have some of the most ambitious targets in the world. We've decarbonised faster than any other major economy, and we're not moving away. We're not moving away from those targets. We're just trying to make sure that the burden doesn't fall on struggling
It
households.
sounds a bit have cake, eat cake though. You're saying, yeah, it's fine, we're going to get to net zero, but guess what? You don't have to make any sacrifices. It's just going to happen magically.
That's absolutely not the case. I mean, it hasn't been happening magically. We have been working really hard for the last 13 years, for example, to clean up our power system. So when we came into power, 7% of our power came from renewables, and it's now well over 40%. I think in Q1 this year it was 48%. That takes hard work. We've got the first, second, third, fourth largest offshore wind farms anywhere in the world in this country, all built under our relatively conservative government. And we're going to have the fifth one too soon. So all of this stuff does take hard work, but I think you can do this in a sensible way. We can meet those targets, but also protect families.
I just want to read a bit of your speech to you, because there was one section of it that really struck me. You said, it's no wonder Labour seems so relaxed about taxing meat. So Keir Starmer doesn't eat it, and Ed Miliband is clearly scarred by his encounter with a bacon sandwich. You didn't write that, did you?
I did actually write that. I think, it's good to have a light moment in your speech as well. But the point is actually...
They're not proposing a meat tax.
The point is actually very serious.
that.
So some of the things that Labour are proposing are incredibly hard for working families.
What's
So
meat
whether
tax?
you have things
What's
like...
meat tax? That's what you're saying here.
Well, so the point is, they are proposing things which are pushing families too hard. So you've got things like the ULEZ tax
That's not meat
expansion, which does cost families £12.50 a day.
It's not meat tax though, is it?
But that is very difficult. And they've got things like proposing that you would decarbonise the electricity grid by 2030, again, which would result in very difficult choices for
Also not
families.
meat tax.
And their plans to push up inflation by borrowing £28 billion. So the point that I was making is quite serious. Yes, that was a light-hearted moment in the speech, but the point is actually deadly serious, that if you push people too far in this country, you will lose the cause of climate change, something that I'm passionate about, because I think it's really important that we get there.
But genuinely, there isn't a meat tax.
Well, actually, if you try and push too hard, what you do end up with is people, and by the way, this has been part of the debate, talking about discouraging people from eating meat. Now, as someone who's worked in government for some time, I can tell you when
there's
people
no meat
tell
tax
people,
under Keir Starmer.
when people tell you that they want to
You said it in your
discourage
speech.
people from eating meat, what they mean
Where did
is
Keir
a
Starmer
tax.
say that?
So when they talk about moving at the pace that they're moving, what they're implying is that difficult choices will have to be made. And we know from having carefully safeguarded this debate that when people talk about trying to do things faster and quicker, they do talk about things like discouraging people from eating meat and changing their dietary requirements.
Keir Starmer's
That definitely-
talked about people
that
eating less
definitely-
meat, has
well,
he?
I mean, Keir Starmer doesn't ever tell people exactly what he thinks, which is part of the problem. What we have tried to do is set out a really clear agenda on net zero, so people know where we stand, which is making sure that we can get to these ambitious targets, but also protecting families.
Now, your face was in a Sunday Times article, headlined, "The Tory Women Who Want to Be Leader." Claire Coutinho, recently elevated to the cabinet as Energy Secretary, has barely any cabinet experience, but she's formidably intelligent and allies speak highly of her political nous. She's likely to emerge as the face of the continuity Sunak calls, likely to emerge as a leadership candidate. That's a meteoric rise.
No, I don't think so. Look, I've only been in my job 6 weeks. I am very busy as it is. I've got two of, I think, some of the most important briefs that we've got in the country, energy security and net zero, and I'm very passionate about delivering both.
At the same time, though, you can see it going on around us, the jostling for position, the different speeches by different wings of the party. Would you be a bit tempted to tilt yourself at some point?
No, look, like I said, I'm very busy with the current position.
Okay. It feels a little bit like you're kind of taking that time-honoured role as the leadership candidate that the papers talk about, who seems to have sort of come from nowhere, if you like. So can you just give us a bit of a sense? I feel this is your first kind of big interview since getting the big elevation. So give us a sense of yourself. What's something people might not know about you?
I would say the reason that I am so honoured and privileged to do this role is it actually covers a lot of the things that I've been interested in my whole career. So one is investment and economy. The second is struggling households, something that I've done work with since I was about 16, and the third is the environment. And I think actually this brief brings all of those three things together, and that's exactly what I'm going to be focused on delivering for the country.
What's your position when it comes to taxes? Michael Gove told my colleague Trevor Phillips yesterday that he wants to see tax cuts before the election. Do you?
Well, look, we all want to see tax cuts. We're Conservatives. That is part of our philosophy. I think the really important thing at the moment is inflation. So if you look at what the Conservatives have done over our last period, is we've taken quite a lot of people, particularly at the bottom of society, out of tax. But something which affects everybody, particularly those people who are in those kind of lowest deciles, is inflation.
So it doesn't sound to me like tax cuts before the election is where you're at.
I would say I think the priority has to be tackling inflation, because not only does it make the poorest in society poorer, it also affects public services, it also affects businesses.
Do you think that are tax cuts inflationary?
I would love to see tax cuts, but I think the priority economically has to be to tackle inflation. And actually, we've seen it move a long way. So if you think about the beginning of the year, it was 11%. It's now coming down. It's forecast to fall further next year, but that, to me, has to be the priority.